denizens of the night. Welcome to another episode of the macabre, the terrifying. Broadcasting live from high ground, I will be your guide through the witching hours. Tonight, we'll dip into another two-parter from A.G. Hilton. Our story opens on a convoy of trucks transporting mysterious cargo to a holding facility. It's absolutely pouring rain, and it could just be my imagination. But didn't something shift back there? This story is called Floods and was written by A.G. Hilton. Another gust of wind screamed across the narrow access road, its invisible fingers prying at the small convoy as it winded its way down the mountainside. Consisting of two tactical vehicles which preceded and flanked a large truck with a metal container in its covered bed, the convoy moved with measured deliberation. To their left, the steeply inclined side of the mountain loomed, while to the right opened a precipitous drop-off into darkness. They had lost the light early, owing to the overcast sky which threatened imminent violence, and the headlights of the vehicles began to illuminate the first fat droplets of rain which fell. "You feel that?" asked the driver of the truck. "Feel what?" returned the man in the passenger seat. "That wind. I swear we shifted a little during that last gust." "You're imagining it. This big hunk of metal isn't going anywhere. You're just nervous about the transfer." "You aren't? Do you even know what we're hauling back there?" A beat of silence passed between them. "Only what little they said in the briefing," the passenger admitted. "Lucky you." Another gust of wind howled. The driver felt the wheel tremble in his hands and tried not to think about how strong a wind would need to be to disturb a vehicle of this size. "Why do they have to make the transfer now?" the passenger asked as he surveyed the dark clouds. "This is high ground. I would have kept it at the facility until this weather blew over." "Hell, I'd do a lot different if I was in charge. But it was a last-minute decision. Apparently, something about the storm's trajectory is unusual. They think it could settle in the hills. The facility could get compromised." "No kidding?" A flash of lightning filled the sky. The driver threw up a hand to shield his eyes as the world went white and a deafening boom rang out. He had only a moment after his vision cleared to see what had happened and slam the brakes. Just before them, the lead vehicle was now tangled in a fallen tree. A quick application of the brakes got the truck stopped before a collision could occur, and the two men jerked against their seatbelts with the motion. Something shifted in the container behind them. The driver cursed, looking between the tangled lead vehicle and the precipitous mountain drop-off to their right. With the obstacle before them and the other vehicle following them closely behind, they were boxed in. The pair each swore to themselves quietly. "What now?" the passenger asked. "Isn't that thing up there military grade? Think they can push through? I sure as hell don't have plans to get out in the middle of this to try to clear it." Punctuating his words, the wind beat furiously on the vehicle. Now there was no question that the gusting was rocking the heavy truck. Then, as if in answer to another booming peal of thunder, there came another loud thud from the container behind them, followed by a much more pronounced rocking of the truck, which amplified the effect of the wind. "What the?" The passenger exchanged a glance with the driver, who now looked a few shades paler, before vocalizing what they had both been thinking. That wasn't the wind. Thunder roared again, and it almost sounded like it was answered by a muffled bellow. Then, thud, and the entire truck rocked again. "It's supposed to be sedated," the passenger said. "The briefing, they said they would make sure it didn't—" The rain let loose then, and the reach of the headlights dropped such that they barely see the tree-encumbered vehicle before them. When the wind came again, it bent the trees lining the road like flimsy stalks of wheat. Something in the driver's gut said, "Run," but there was no chance. Exactly what happened next was not clear to him. Perhaps they were pushed by another falling tree. Perhaps the wind had found just the right way to blow against them. Or perhaps it was caused by that frenzied pounding from the back of the truck, which he could no longer deny. Whatever the cause, the world suddenly tilted on its axis, and the truck rolled off the right-hand shoulder to plunge into the gorge below. The men screamed as metal twisted and groaned. Then all was muted by rushing water as they met with the waiting river. The driver managed to get free and throw himself from the cab of the truck as the rig went into the water. Clinging to a partially submerged log, he fought not to be washed away. He could not see his former passenger, did not think of him. All his focus was taken by the cracked metal husk of the container they'd been hauling, visible only briefly in the next flash of lightning, and the glistening shape which slipped free of it to disappear in the churning water. "Ew, slimy, slimy!" Elaine suppressed a laugh as she watched little Nathan hold out the squirming thing to his older sister. For her part, the little girl continued to back away with her very vocal protest. "It's okay, Naomi. Nathan just wants to show you the salamander he found under the rock. Can you say salamander?" "Amander," Nathan squealed, not quite getting all the syllables right. He tottered after his sister, hand still outstretched. The three moved along the edge of a small creek, one of many which flowed through the flat, forested land which lay down the hill from the house which they had recently bought. They wore their brightly colored jackets to ward off a light mist which was turning toward rain. Normally, she would have tried to dissuade the kids from traipsing around in the mud, but the forecasts were saying that some truly bad weather had hit the mountains and was heading their way. In fact, talk was that they might be cooped up for some time depending on how things played out. Best to let the kids get some energy out while they were able. As the two children splashed in the creek, Elaine turned back to look at the house. Jonathan was there in the yard, apparently still wrapping up the tree-cutting work which their kindly neighbor had agreed to come help with this morning before the weather turned bad. Only now, he just stood there watching them. She must have felt his eyes on her. She gave him a wave and blew him a kiss. He lifted his own hand as if to catch it, and then went back to his work. Even though the creeks were generally no more than inches deep, and only deeper in select pockets, she knew that he worried over the kids playing out here despite being supervised. How could he not? The man was bordering on hydrophobic since what happened to his brother, and considering the circumstance, she felt it was more than understandable. In fact, she knew, though he would never admit as much, that the creeks behind the house had made him hesitant to put in an offer on the place to begin with. Thankfully, she had been able to convince him. The house, only theirs for just under 2 months now, was set into a hill which overlooked the wooded flatland and its little tributaries. It was a nice place, forested and pastoral in its way, despite being within the city limits of the small town nestled in the foothills. She still couldn't believe how lucky they were to get it. Yes, it had pushed the budget, but this would be such a great place for the kids to grow up. Her hope was that it would give them more opportunities to get out and not be in front of screens all the time. They now had space, privacy, and the cherry on top was that the one close neighbor was a delight. Presently, the light mist of rain became more defined. Where once ghosting droplets collected on their jackets, they now felt the definitive patter of falling drops from above. "All right, you two," Elaine called after the frolicking kids. "Let's get back before it turns nasty." Naomi stepped around her brother and raced to her mother's side. She hid there while Nathan did an about face and came on behind her with the salamander still in hand. "Make him put it down, Mommy! Make him stop!" Naomi wailed. "Salamander!" Elaine shook her head and did her best to suppress a laugh. "Okay, Nathan, that's enough. Stop tormenting your sister. Put it down and let's go inside." "No," the boy protested. Keep Salamander." "We can't keep him. Put him back in his home." Nathan shrugged and pitched the poor critter back into the creek. "Gently," Elaine finished too late. Nathan beamed at her. She offered him her hand, and he took it. Together, the three of them began picking their way through the trees and back toward the house. "Come on, you two. Let's get dry and see what Daddy and Mr. Payne are up to. And Nathan, I think the next word we're going to learn is gentle." "That's it. I think she's about ready to go. Just give a little push there, nice and firm-like, and then back on up." Jonathan stepped forward as the older man instructed and placed a hand on the small tree which they'd been hacking on. With a push, the chopped base groaned and the wood split as the whole thing toppled over. Jonathan put out a hand, caught some falling raindrops. "Guess that bad weather's coming in sooner than I thought." "I reckon so," Mr. Payne agreed. "Probably a good time for quitting." The man's bald pate already glistened with moisture as he bent over to retrieve the axe they'd been using to cut down the larger of the saplings. The hope was to clear the area for a future fence installation. He was a large man with dark, weathered skin and roughened hands well used to work. Jonathan couldn't place his age. He imagined Payne was easily over 50, but still he had the stamina of someone much younger, or so Jonathan now thought after seeing the man at work, for the older man had insisted on helping him whip the place into shape. "Thanks again for the help," Jonathan said. "You really don't need to be wasting your time with this. Offering to let me use some of your stuff before I can get tools of my own is already a huge help by itself." "Oh, ain't nothing but a thing. I'm happy to help. Happy to have some new neighbors that are good folks." "Likewise," Jonathan agreed. He turned and squinted out into the land behind the house. 3 colorful dots, Elaine and the 2 kids, were picking their way back toward them. He watched them for a time. He'd been about to go retrieve them after feeling the first raindrops. "What do the little ones make of the place?" "The kids. They liking it here?" "Sure. They're settling in. I know Elaine is happy. Thinks being in a more natural setting will be good for their development or something like that." Mr. Payne chuckled. "Well, I don't know about all that, but I spent my whole life in this little burg and reckon it's been a good one if that counts for anything. Say, speaking of Elaine, here they come." By now, the trio had made their way to the sloping yard. Nathan let go of his mother's hand and toddled up the hill to plow into his father's shins. Jonathan answered with a pretend growling and snatched the little boy up, turning him over so that he dangled upside down for a moment, squealing in delight all the while. "Y'all have a good adventure?" asked Mr. Payne. "We sure did," answered Elaine. "Learned a new word, too. Nathan, can you tell Mr. Payne what you found?" "Alamander." The old man took on a faux serious air. "You don't say. My grandma used to tell me it was good luck to find 'em, so that's a mighty good thing in my book." Then his sunny smile returned, and he turned to Naomi. The little girl stood partially behind her mother. "And what about you, little lady? How are you doing this fine day?" Naomi gave him a shy smile, but stepped further behind her mother. "Yin and yang, those two," Elaine said, with an amused smile. She knelt to be eye level with Naomi. "Why don't you take your little brother inside? We'll be in soon. And please leave the muddy shoes by the door this time." "Okay, Mommy." And the little girl took her brother by the hand. He made small, complaining noises at first, but went along nevertheless. They really did get along so well. After the kids were out of earshot, Jonathan turned to Mr. Payne. "How's it get around here when bad weather hits?" "You worried about a spot of flooding?" "Yeah, maybe. I know the realtor said it wasn't an issue, but the way they're talking now, this storm is settling in just west of here. And that," he indicated the flat land beyond the house, "looks like a floodplain to me." "I reckon so," agreed Mr. Payne. "Hard to believe looking at it from this side, but the portion of river which goes by town is just on the other side of this land. It's been known to swell the bank ever so often and fill up down there. You should see Main Street on occasion when it's been real bad. But it's never really been anything serious in all my time here, so no, I don't expect you'll have trouble on this side. Seen a good deal of water come down before and seen it come up high in rare occasion, but never enough to get up to the houses. Reckon whoever built the places on this side of the river tried to take that into account." Jonathan nodded and turned back to the land behind the house. If anyone could give him reassurance, surely it was the man who had lived his whole life in the place. But still, he couldn't help but picture water lapping, first at the bottom of the sloped yard, then at the house. The thought hit him with an image: murky darkness, thrashing hands, a sense of not knowing which way was up and which down, and he felt cold. Elaine must have sensed his shift in mood. She stepped up beside him and took his hand. "Well, that is a relief to hear. Isn't it, honey?" Her touch brought him back to the present. "Yes, it really is. Sorry, it's just... Never mind." He turned back to the older man. "Hey, thanks again for your help with the yard. Let me help you get your things together and I'll carry them back to your place." "Don't you worry about that. We still got a ways to go if we're going to clear what you want from that side yard. I don't mind if you just keep it all over here till we're done." "You sure?" "Positive. Save us some back and forth trips." "We owe you big time," Elaine put in. "You'll have to let us have you over for dinner sometime." "Oh, it's no trouble at all. Happy to help. Like I said, I reckon y'all are good folks, and it's good to have those little ones running around this neck of the woods. Makes the old bones feel a little less creaky watching them romp." As the man spoke, the few rain droplets which fell seemed to swell to even fatter and were soon joined by others. Jonathan began to gather the various cutting implements to put them away. "I better head on back," Mr. Payne said. Miss Lottie from across the river is going to be expecting my evening visit. We'll see if I can make it before the weather turns too sour. Hey, y'all take care. Miss Elaine, y'all call me if you need anything here. I'll come running. We will. Thank you again. And with that, the old man took his leave. Help you with that stuff? Elaine asked Jonathan. Please. Actually, if you could just grab that axe he left there leaning against the house, I think I can get the rest. They went in through a sliding glass door that opened to the basement. The door faced out over the flat lands behind the house and granted entry to a plain concrete room punctuated by pillars that supported the structure above. Boxes from the recent move were still stacked about, and an old workbench mouldered in one corner, along with some odds and ends abandoned by the property's previous owner. At the opposite end of the space from the door rose the stairs to the house's upper levels, and beyond them, set into the concrete slab wall, was a small access hatch to the crawl space which ran beneath the front of the house. "We can put this stuff over on that workbench," Jonathan said. Then, with a look around the basement, "I guess we're about to see how watertight this place is." Having put the axe on the old workbench, Elaine came up behind him and wrapped her arms about his middle, placed her head against the center of his back. "You okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine. Just nervous hearing the talk about the storm, I guess. It's nothing." "I don't think it's nothing." He offered no response. It had been so long, but it seemed time wasn't the healer he'd been led to believe. Something about the move had darkened his thoughts, sending him back to that day he wanted to wish away. But he didn't want to get into it. Once or twice more recently, he'd felt the urge to open up. But every time he went to put it into words, he felt too vulnerable, silly. Elaine didn't release him. "It's about your brother Nate, isn't it?" "I know it's been a while, but it's nothing to worry about," he said, and gently pried himself free while turning to face her. "Just a little anxious since we've barely gotten started here, and we're already facing down some freak weather." "I'm with you there," she said. He knew she was unsatisfied with the answer, but no more questions were forthcoming as she turned and looked to the sliding glass basement door. The two of them stood there for a time, side by side, as the rain picked up from a patchy drizzle to a steady sprinkle outside. This time, he took her hand in his. "Come on, we've left the kids to their own devices too long, and it's way too quiet up there. Better see what trouble they've gotten up to." Darkness fell earlier than normal upon the small town. The stop and start of the rain increased to a steady patter as swollen clouds descended from the mountainous west upon a wind which gathered in its strength. "You can run on home if the weather's your worry." Snapped out of his contemplation, Mr. Payne turned from the window to address the woman sitting in the chair across from him. Miss Lottie was pushing 90, but her blue eyes were as keen as ever. She had been a dear friend of his mother, God rest her soul, and he'd taken to keeping her company in the evenings for some time now. It was his ritual. Perhaps it was that he had spent so much time with the woman in recent years, but she could read him like a book. "Yeah, I reckon I am getting a little antsy," he said. "Never mind. It's probably nothing." "Oh, I don't know about that. My knee has been acting up since yesterday. I think this storm is going to give us a good wallop." Mr. Payne tried to keep his expression neutral as he looked back to the window. Miss Lottie's knee was as good a sign as any that bad weather was coming, and that bothered him. Because ever since he left that young couple's house, he'd gotten a funny feeling in his gut. He got it every now and again, just a fluttering that seemed to say, Look out. He supposed it was just what they called intuition, though he'd never considered himself particularly insightful. Whatever the cause, he couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was on the way. But then of course it was. One only had to look at the sky to know that. A white flash filled the window, punctuated a few seconds later by a peal of thunder. "Maybe you better run on home before it gets bad," Miss Lottie said. "Yeah, maybe I'm better. Sorry to run out early." "No reason to apologize. You come on back after this blows over here?" "Yes, ma'am. I may give you a call to check in sometime before then. You be safe now." As he left for his truck, Mr. Payne saw a porch light illuminate the next-door neighbor, a stout woman with close cropped hair, stepping onto the back porch to watch the gathering gloom. Her face flashed with a brief orange glow as she lit a cigarette. She saw him and waved. "Evening, Miss Bettery," he called to her. "You coming or going?" she asked. "Going. I think it's time to batten down the hatches." "You be safe now." "You too. And keep an eye out for Miss Lottie, won't you?" "You know I will." Then he was off, and the rain started falling in earnest. She wasn't certain what had roused her from her sleep, but Elaine came awake in the wee hours of the morning. A strong beating of rain against the windows thrummed throughout the house. She lay there, trying and failing to drift off again, until a streak of lightning lit the bedroom. She got up and checked the children. Neither stirred. Jonathan remained in bed sleeping, but she doubted it was restful. He'd tossed and turned, muttering to himself on occasion. It was becoming a nightly occurrence. She let him be for now, and went to survey the backyard from the large bay window at the rear of the house. Another flash of lightning lit the scene. The area where she and the kids had been playing the day before was already flooded by the swelling tributaries. But that was nothing to worry about. Mr. Payne had said it was normal to flood down there. With that, she went back to the bedroom. Jonathan seemed particularly fitful now. His hands twitched, fingers looking like they sought some phantom object to grasp. His muttering had turned to a softer, almost mewling sound. "Hey," she said, and shook him gently. The day had been bright, and now the sky turned a burned orange as the sun began to set. He sat in the small rented fishing boat, the two of them doing more talking than catching these last hours as they bobbed in the little cove. "Guess that's our cue," said Nate. "Guess so." Jonathan drew in his own line as his brother began settling his things and priming the outboard motor. "Gotta get you back to that wife of yours. She's due soon, isn't she?" "Next few weeks, they say." "Damn! My little brother, a father of two. Never thought I'd see the day." Jonathan laughed. "You're telling me. In all truth, we hadn't planned to expand the family, but it feels like the right time. You know, sometimes I half expect to wake up from it all, like the past several years have been a dream or something." "Hey, buddy, maybe you just keep on sleeping in that case, 'cause that sounds like a sweet dream." The motor burbled to life, and the boat began easing out of the cove toward the main body of the lake. Something happened then, as they left the mouth of the cove. The roar of another motor was upon them, seemingly from nowhere, and with a scream and a resounding crash, the world went from warm sunset to cold depths. His voice blubbered in an underwater howl. He fought for the surface, but his leg was caught in some bit of the overturned fishing gear. panic set in. He'd heard it said that drowning was peaceful in the end, more or less going to sleep with the lack of oxygen. But whoever said that must never have had the pleasure of a first-hand experience. There was nothing peaceful about his desperate struggle and looming thought that soon he'd have no choice but to drink in the cold blackness. Lungs burning, he kicked viciously until his shoe slipped free and whatever entangled his leg released him. Breaking the surface, he flailed, calling for help. The lone roar of that foreign motor faded as an indistinct shape tore away from the scene. He cursed after it. Then he realized that his voice rang out alone. He looked this way and that, calling his brother's name. A new panic blossomed in his chest. He plunged back to the depths, wildly reaching out, probing the overturned craft. There was no one there. Then something had hold of him and he screamed. Elaine jumped back as Jonathan woke, not with a start, but with a flurried thrashing. His eyes showed too much white as they opened, an animal look of sheer panic. At first, he didn't seem to see or recognize her. Hey, it's me. You were having a bad dream. He sat there a moment as he came back to himself. She turned on the bedside lamp and found him glistening with sweat. His chest heaved up and down as he gulped in breath. Finally, he seemed to see her standing there. Sorry. Did I wake you? No, I guess it was the storm. I just got up to check things out. Is something wrong? No, everything's fine. He sat up, swung his legs out of bed. For a time, neither spoke. The wind whistled against the eaves of the house. What time is it? He asked. Barely 4 a.m. Why don't you lie back down? I don't think I can. She came around to his side of the bed, sat next to him. In that case, why don't you go down to the living room? I think I'm going to make some coffee. Yeah, that sounds nice, actually. He was staring out the bay window when she came to him, steaming mug in hand. He didn't like the look of all that water out there. Quit staring out there. Come on, sit, Elaine urged. He did so, taking the offered mug. The coffee felt doubly warm and comforting as it went down. She sat beside him on the couch, leaned against him while cradling her own mug. Despite the storm, or maybe because of it, the living room took on a cozy air at odds with the chaos outside. You okay? She asked. He almost gave the usual, fine, but the look in her eye stopped him. She was genuinely concerned, and he was withdrawing again. After some hesitation, he said, I've been having this dream lately. Tell me about it. Come on, it's just a bad dream. No, you come on. Let's say it is just a dream. It's still doing a number on you. You're not sleeping well these days. You toss and turn so much. She paused, looked down. It's gotten worse since we moved in here. He said nothing, didn't know what to say. Is it about Nate? He felt a lump in his throat when he tried to speak. His eyes burned. He could only nod. She put her arms around him. Oh, baby, talk to me, please. You never talked about it after it happened, with the baby coming so soon after. What is there to say? It happened and I can't change it. That's all there is to it. Besides, it's been so long now. You know that is not true. You insisted we name our son after him, Jonathan. How can you tell me there's nothing more to it? I know it's still on your mind." She was right, and he knew it. He felt a dam of suppressed emotion slowly giving way and took a deep breath. "Lately, I keep dreaming about the day it happened. It's so vivid. Some asshole comes out of nowhere and bam! We're in the water. When it happens, it almost feels more real than the thing itself. But it's not always exactly like how it was. It changes sometimes. Sometimes I even manage to catch hold of him in the dreams, but his hands always slip away." Elaine tightened her grip on him. It had to be so horrible being there, experiencing it. I can't imagine. But you can't be blaming yourself if that's what this is about. It was an accident. That other person hit you guys. But I just think about Nate, tangled alone down there in the dark until his breath ran out. He shouldn't have been there at all. I fucking invited him out that day. If we hadn't gone, or maybe if I'd been faster, I took too long getting free, and I should have dived deeper, but I panicked. God, I was so scared when I got snagged under the boat, but I should have. He found he couldn't continue. If he said one more word, he'd fall to pieces. Nevertheless, tears came. Elaine sat up, looked him in the eye. He tried to look away, but she held him. "You are the bravest person I know. You tried. You were the only other one there, and you tried. That is what matters. No, you can't change what happened. But don't you go spinning lies to yourself. It was not your fault. He would not want you carrying that." She held him close, and slowly he wrapped his own arms around her. Unlike the cold dream, she was warm and reassuring, and he felt lighter? Yes, maybe a little lighter than he had before. "Mommy? Daddy?" Jonathan wiped his eyes and found Naomi standing in the living room. "Hey, sweetie. Did we wake you up?" "No. The thunder." "Come here," he said, and motioned for her to join them. "We can't sleep either. Where's your brother?" "Still sleeping. Bet he can't hear the thunder over his snoring." And he couldn't help but laugh at that. To the west, the storm settled in the mountains and grinded them beneath its weight. Wind tore trees from the soaked earth and blasted down upon the open places with invisible wrath. Water poured in sheets, swelling the creeks and rivers such that they burst from their banks and ran rampant. And as it went, the raging rivers pushed and surged along, sweeping many a strange thing down to the lowlands beyond. Elaine stood in the kitchen watching the kids. Naomi doodled in a notebook while some animated show played episode after episode on the screen. Little Nathan, who seemed the only one to get any actual rest, stood by the bay window looking at the rain and the flooded flatlands. She wondered what he thought about it. Was he scared? No, probably just curious. In fact, he was probably only wondering when they could go hunt for alamanders again. No, he might not be scared, but she was starting to get nervous. Jonathan planned to call in sick, but there'd been no need. A shelter-in-place order had been issued, and it seemed no one would be getting out and about anytime soon. But thankfully, they still had power, and though the water was now in the lower parts of the sloped yard, it had some distance to go before it would get close to them. But that rain was not letting up. As she walked through the house, she noticed the basement door was cracked open. She'd been on Jonathan about that since they'd moved in. For some reason, the damn thing wouldn't stay latched, and the last thing she wanted was for the kids to take a tumble down the steps. She went to shove it closed, but noticed light shining up from below. Descending, she found Jonathan in the basement. He was walking the perimeter, examining the seams between the floors and the wall. "Everything okay down here?" she asked. "Yeah, just checking. Doesn't seem to be any leaks or anything." "That's a relief." "You're telling me." He walked to the glass door at the rear of the basement and looked out on the watery lowlands beyond. She came and stood next to him. Together, they watched the churning of the current. "What would we do?" Elaine asked. "That is, just if, that water gets up this high." He'd just been thinking on that very thing, and her bringing it up now unnerved him. He'd been in storms before, but there are storms, and then there are storms. As in, no simple collection of wind and rain, but a blind and vicious force of nature which might stretch forth its hand on a whim and snuff you out without reason. The kind of thing that makes you remember how fragile this physical existence is in the face of such ungovernable chaos. "We'll get out," he said, casting the thoughts away. "Out?" "Payne's up the road. He's got a little elevation on us. Say the water makes it this high, which isn't likely, he'll still be well above it. It's not far. I think we could even make it on foot if it came to it. It was really that bad." She considered this and nodded. Then, together, they resumed their masks of calm. They went back upstairs to the kids, to the flickering power. For a short time, they were even able to put the encroaching weather out of mind as they tried to keep the homebound little ones occupied. But rather than slacking off, the storm picked up in intensity as the dark clouds continued their descent after throwing down their destruction onto the distant hills. The world outside deepened its unbreakable gloom, such that all was cast into a perpetual, howling twilight. The terrible turn in the weather found Rhonda Bettery sat, cigarette burned to nub, watching the river swell into Main Street from her top floor window. Her phone began ringing. "Bettery," she answered. "Evening. It's Payne from across the river. You okay out there? Water's getting up into town over this way." "I'm fine. But I wondered if you'd heard from Miss Lottie?" She ground the nub of the cigarette in an ashtray on the windowsill. "Haven't heard from anybody since it got going out there. Something wrong?" "Well, I don't know. With the weather being so bad and me not being able to check in on her, I thought I'd give her a call to chat for a bit. We do that sometimes with bad weather and such. Only she ain't answered. That ain't normal for her." "Yeah, I'd say so." Frowning, she was already on her feet and headed for the door. "Pretty bad out there, but I have half a mind to step out and check on her. I wouldn't ask anybody to go out in this, but I would feel better if someone could make sure she was all right. Make me feel better, too." She shrugged an arm into her heavy raincoat, kept the phone to her ear with the other. "I'm about to head over there right now, actually. Stay on the line. I'm gonna zip this phone up in my pocket till I get over there." Upon opening the door, it was nearly torn from her hands by a gust of wind. She cursed but kept hold of it, while managing to keep from being pulled over. Once she got it closed behind her, she trudged across the small bit of waterlogged ground separating the two houses. She saw light coming from the back door of Miss Lottie's place and was at first reassured, but then realized the light was coming from inside the house. The back door stood open. Mr. Payne drummed his fingers on the couch's armrest, phone held to his ear. The silent TV played updates on the destruction and the path of the storm as he listened to the muted chaos and the rustle of pocket liner picked up by the phone's speaker. Then the voice came back, shouting against the weather. "Payne, you still there?" "Yes, ma'am. Everything okay?" There was a pause, filled by the howl of wind. That funny feeling in his gut kicked up in intensity. "I'm not sure," Miss Bettery said at last. "The back door's open. There's something... I'm just not sure. Something must have hit it. Almost looks a little torn up. But the lights are on. I'm going inside." He sat there and listened. He heard Miss Bettery calling out the old woman's name. Each repetition of the name worsened that uneasy flutter in his gut. Something was very wrong. When the voice turned panicked, he knew he was right. He had to control himself so as to not shout into the phone. "Miss Bettery, what is it? What's going on over there?" "Gone! I don't know, the chair." "Oh my God." "What is it?" "Her sitting chair, the one she likes so much. It's overturned in the living room. So's her walker. There's something... Oh God, it looks like blood." His heart raced. That eerie flutter in his gut had him expecting bad news, but what was she saying about blood and overturned furniture? That didn't sound like the storm damage he'd been expecting. "Miss Bettery, talk to me. Tell me what happened. Do we need to call someone?" The voice on the phone was frantic. It struck Mr. Payne that he had never heard the stern woman in such a state before. "It is blood. There's more. It goes to the front of the house. A window's broken open, too. I just don't... What could have..." The voice stopped abruptly. He held the phone out to look at its screen. He no longer had cell service. Before he could manage to order his thoughts, there came a deep groaning of wood and the crash of a falling tree outside. "I think I'm gonna go crazy if I have to sit through another episode of this," Jonathan said, indicating the kids' show playing on the TV. He looked to the kids. "Oh, I got it. Why don't we all just sit quietly for a bit?" "Oh, Daddy, no, that's boring," Naomi said. He looked to Elaine with a sly grin. "Thought the whole point of moving here was to try to be more unplugged." She looked up from the book she'd been reading on her end of the couch. "Go on, call me a hypocrite. Right now, I just want to ward off cabin fever and keep the little people happy until this is over." He shook his head with a smile and was about to make another dig at her when there came a delighted squealing. Nathan stood by the window, beating his little hands on it. Elaine rose and went to him. "Salamander!" he squealed. "Oh, I think the salamanders had to duck and cover, bud. We can hunt for more when the water's gone." "Salamander!" he repeated, pointing at the window. She scooped him up, causing yet another squeal of delight. That was when the lights flickered. And there was something else. Amid the noise of the wind and thunder outside, Jonathan thought he heard something at the back of the house. He got to his feet. "Honey?" Elaine's look held a dozen unspoken questions. "I'm gonna check something." "What is it?" "Probably nothing. Something might have hit the back of the house, but it didn't sound big. Just sit tight with the kids." He walked the back of the house, checking the windows and generally looking for any signs of damage from debris. He found nothing. During his walkthrough, he noticed the basement door was ajar again. As he went to close it, he felt a draft from below, and his heart quickened. Flicking on the light and descending the steps, he found that one of the glass doors had been broken. The wind whistled over the opening. Water seeped in, and a streak of it extended into the room. What the hell? He went to the remains of the door. Something coated the broken glass. Clear as the water, but slick and more viscous. He pinched some between his thumb and finger and watched the stuff stretch in thin strands as he pulled them apart. He had no clue what the stuff was, but there was no time to worry about it. If he didn't do something to block this up, the wind would blow so much water into the basement that it wouldn't matter if the flooding reached them. He recalled an old wooden door, likely replaced but never discarded by the previous owner, leaned against the far wall along with some other odd bits of lumber by the workbench. Retrieving it, he set to bracing it as best he could. As luck had it, the portion of the sliding door which was still intact was the one with the handle used to pull the door closed or open. Through this handle, he was able to place a long board to brace his makeshift barrier in place. God, what a mess. He'd need to clean up the glass and the water that had gotten in. He took a moment to survey the floor. The water which had been pushed in was red. Was it from the silt or the clay earth? He had no chance to ponder it. The lights flickered again. For a few moments, he seemed to waver between their safe interior world of light and the perpetual darkness which surrounded the house. Then, somewhere in the distance, there was a loud cracking and a crash as that outer darkness flooded the home in full. He raced back up to the main level of the home.
Aw, what's the matter? Afraid of a little Stygian floodwater and the lightless gloom of a basement? Oh, well, yeah, me too, come to think of it. And who knows what else is down there? That glass broke for a reason, right? There didn't seem to be any obvious culprit around. So where did it go? Yes, now that I spell it out like that, I'd be absolutely terrified myself. This is actually parts 1 and 2 of a 4-part story, the second half of which I'll share with you next week. I know you're awash with despair at having to wait, but I promise you the payoff will be worth it. If you'd like to listen to more stories while you wait, please check out this playlist of A.G. Hilton's work, which should tide you over in the meantime. Please also leave a like on this video and let me know what sort of storm monster preparedness strategies you have. Whatever you do, stay out of the flooded basement and don't fall asleep.